The FNAF lore has always been tricky, to say the very least. In a series with little to no confirmed lore and a story that was being made at the same rate that it was being told, it didn't take long before holes started to appear, and snap decisions needed to be made to try and piece things together. One of the tools Scott has used for this is retroactive storytelling. Essentially, Scott has gone back to previous forms of media and taken bits and pieces from them that weren't fully developed at the time, and then added new context to them that wouldn't change anything that was already established. This is dangerously close to being a retcon, and depending on how you look at things, it very well might be one, but I digress. Today, we're here to take a look at the earliest points of the series, not as in the first events of the timeline, but the very first game that was ever released, the first Five Nights at Freddy's. Despite there not being a fully established story yet, there were plenty of elements sprinkled throughout the game that told echoes of a greater story at large. So first, we're going to be looking at all of these elements in a vacuum, identifying them and what they mean purely in context of each other. Then we're going to go 10 years in the future and see what's happened with these plot points ever since. Have they evolved, or have they just stagnated? By brushing up on old clues, perhaps we can piece new things together, and maybe, just maybe, we can find that ever-elusive retcon that Scott hinted at years ago. There's only one way to find out. Now, let's turn back the clock and take a look at how it all began.
Hello. I wanted to record a message for you to help you get settled in on your first night.
This is Phone Guy, who acts as somewhat of a guide for us throughout the first 4 nights, giving us loose instructions on what we're supposed to be doing. I could play the whole phone call for you here, but honestly that would take up a lot of time, and I'm pretty sure all of you have heard it before, so let's just talk about the highlights. Phone Guy has a bad problem of downplaying everything that Fazbear Entertainment does, and is more or less just giving them a free pass on everything that's happened at the company. Considering the fact that there are specific protocols in place for if something goes wrong, and the fact that Phone Guy worked the night shift before us, he should have plenty of reason to be skeptical of Fazbear Entertainment and its policies. And speaking of reasons to be wary of Fazbear, let's talk about the very first mystery of the series, the Bite of 87. The animatronics used to be able to roam during the day, but then after an incident involving someone losing their frontal lobe, they can't anymore. Amazingly enough, despite the loss of a frontal lobe, the victim didn't actually die. At least, not right away. We're not told if this character is still alive at this point in time, but at the very least, they didn't die immediately. The last thing we should talk about here is how the animatronics are programmed to act. According to Phone Guy, the animatronics will most likely see you as a metal endoskeleton without a suit on, and since that's against the rules, they'll try stuffing you into an animatronic suit. That's all from Phone Guy for now. He gave us basically all of the relevant information he has on the very first night, so we won't be talking about him much more in this segment. We'll keep his important points pinned for now, and come back to them later. Let's shift gears and talk about one of the more important pieces of FNAF 1's history for a minute. The It's Me screen. This happens randomly throughout the game. The words "It's me" will flash on screen numerous times, as well as an image of Freddy and an image of Bonnie. Let's talk about those two for a moment, specifically about their eyes. Freddy's eyes, while they do look similar to the ones he has on promotional material, such as the poster in your office, are distinctly human. Take a close look at them side by side, and you can very easily notice the visible veins in Freddy's eyes here. That's a clear sign that these are actual human eyes, not animatronic eyes that are designed to look the part. Bonnie, on the other hand, doesn't actually have eyes here. He has white pupils with a pitch black eye socket. Bonnie also has this appearance when he gets really close to the cameras. Freddy can also be seen with eyes like this, both on cameras and even in one of his jump scares. Interestingly enough, Chica and Foxy don't have eyes like this at any point of the game. It's Me can also randomly pop up on the cameras, but we don't have a good idea as to what it actually means as of this moment. Speaking of things that can pop up on cameras, let's talk about the newspapers real quick. These can randomly pop up when you check the cameras. Kids vanish at local pizzeria. Bodies not found. 5 children now reported missing. Suspect convicted. Local pizzeria threatened with shutdown over sanitation. Local pizzeria said to close by year's end. I don't want to read these line by line for you, so I'll give you the spark notes. 2 kids were alerted to a back room by a man dressed up as a company mascot. Surveillance footage found the man responsible for this, and he was captured the following morning, but the bodies were never found. 5 children were ultimately linked to this incident. The health department began threatening the pizzeria with shutdown over reports of foul odor coming from the animatronics, as well as signs of blood and mucus around the mouth and eyes. Then, after a long struggle to stay in business after the tragedy that took place there many years ago, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza announces that it will close by year's end, after a year-long search for a buyer that led nowhere. There's a lot of information there. We have 5 missing kids being lured away to the back rooms by someone in an animatronic costume, and then the animatronics reportedly have the stench of death all over them. This takes care of a majority of the things that we see in this game, so let's try to speed our way through the rest of it. On night 4, Phone Guy f***ing dies. Specifically, it sounds like Golden Freddy is the one to kill him. Speaking of whom, Golden Freddy is a hallucination in this game that only shows up on random occasions, and if you look at him for too long, you die. On night 5, with Phone Guy dead, the message that plays is instead a reversed and garbled up excerpt from Autobiography of a Yogi, written by someone named this. Quite frankly, I'm too intimidated to even try pronouncing that, but shout out to them. By beating Night 5, and also on Night 6, you get paid for your work. The paychecks are dated November 12th and 13th of an unspecified year, and are written to Mike Schmidt. And by beating the game's custom night, you get fired for tampering with animatronics, general unprofessionalism, and odor. Speaking of the custom night, if you set the difficulty as 1987, you get jump scared. Specifically by Golden Freddy. That's more or less everything that FNAF 1 has to offer. If I missed something, you can let me know in the comments, and we could maybe have a discussion about it there. Make sure you like and subscribe while you're at it. But now, with all that covered, let's move the clocks forward again. What will all of these loose strands of evidence look like after 10 whole years of new context? To start, let's talk about our playable character, Mike Schmidt. Now, while we do have multiple characters named Mike across the entire franchise, it's widely agreed upon that this is Michael Afton. In fact, most people tend to think that we play as Mike throughout all of the first 6 games, with very few exceptions. There's some debate on if we play as him in FNAF 3, but that's a topic for another video entirely. There's also FNAF 2, which is weird. FNAF 2 has us play as multiple different characters, Jeremy Fitzgerald and Fritz Smith. It's widely agreed upon that Fritz Smith is the same person as Mike Schmidt, due to the fact that they get fired for the same reasons, tampering with the animatronics and odor. As for Jeremy Fitzgerald, I got nothing right now. There might be more to dig up there might not be. That's not the focus of this video anyway. All we need to know is that Michael Afton is more than likely Mike Schmidt, who is also more than likely Fritz Smith from FNAF 2, who both got fired for odor and tampering with the animatronics. Speaking of whom, let's talk about why the animatronics are like that. Stuffing people into suits because, apparently, they think that humans are metal endoskeletons outside of their suits. Okay, there are 3 possible options I can think of here. Option A. This is actually just the truth. They're stuffing people into the suits because they think that they're metal endoskeletons. Gotta be honest, I don't buy that for a second. I think that's just Fazbear Entertainment's way of covering their tracks. Option B. They were programmed to do this, but not for the reasons that Fazbear claims. See, when I think of animatronics, I naturally think of William Afton. And when it comes to William Afton, there's one thing that he's seemingly been after for a while. Remnant. How does one get Remnant? Well, harvesting it from an animatronic with a dead body stuffed inside of it is what's always worked for him in the past. On one hand, it checks out from a thematic perspective. However, to say that William programmed this into the animatronics is difficult, to say the very least. Especially considering the fact that these animatronics are already possessed and seem to have a free will of their own. Though William is shown to have control over the FNAF 1 animatronics in the movie, so I suppose it's not impossible. Finally, we have option C. The spirits inside of the animatronics want to do this. Maybe it's because they're alone and want people to be just like them. Honestly, I kinda get that vibe from the week before at times. The animatronics want Ralph to possess the suits just like them. This would kinda circle back to the fact that they're just scared kids on the inside, and that they just don't want to be alone. Personally, this is the one that I believe in the most. It's not that I don't believe that Afton would program animatronics to be remnant farms, it's just that I don't think that he did it to these animatronics. That's what the fun times are for. Whatever the reason may be, though, I think it's pretty hard to deny the fact that Fazbear Entertainment is wholly aware of what's going on with these animatronics, and that they kinda just don't care. Like, sure, some things change here and there, but these things keep happening for a reason. And I'm pretty sure that Fazbear Entertainment just doesn't give a damn, especially after the week before. They're just a comically evil and greedy company that doesn't care about anything other than their profit. Which really makes you wonder, why does Ralph, otherwise known as the Phone Guy, excuse all of it? Turns out there isn't some grandiose reason for that. He's actually just really loyal to Fazbear. Like SpongeBob loves of loyal, it's kinda weird. Even though he has near-death experiences on every single night shift that he takes, he somehow finds a way to excuse all of it, ultimately leading to his own death, heard in FNAF 1 and seen in the week before, all because he didn't heed the obvious warnings from everywhere around him. And of all these warnings, these countless reasons not to trust Fazbear Entertainment and to get as far away from them as possible, there's one that stands chief among them all. The Bite of 87. Well, that and the big bite that happened 4 years prior, but that wasn't a thing in FNAF 1. But the Bite of 87 absolutely was, and to this day, we still aren't entirely sure who's responsible for it. Or do we? See, there's a good chunk of evidence to suggest quite a few different animatronics as the culprit. Foxy being out of order for so long suggests that he did something really bad. Freddy is implied to go after Ralph's frontal lobe during one of the game overs in the week before. The animatronics were no longer able to move around during the day after the bite happened, which implies that it might have been one of the toys. Pair that with the fact that Mangle's jump scare involves him going for the top of your head, and suddenly she's a potential candidate. All of these are somewhat compelling in their own way, and I'm sure that if you tried hard enough, you could make a case for other animatronics as well. But as you try to scan your options, you'll notice something. None of these animatronics are directly correlated with the year 1987. None, except, of course, for one, Golden Freddy. Golden Freddy insta-kills you if you enter 1987 into the game's custom night. And if that sounds familiar to you, that's because it should. Because in the week before, something very similar happens. Only this time it's when you enter 1983. Golden Freddy kills Ralph here, because he was the animatronic responsible for the bite of 83. And here, way back in FNAF 1, we have the same thing happening, only now with 1987. Granted, this isn't infallible evidence by any means. If it was, then Golden Freddy would also kill Ralph when he enters the code 1987. Though it's worth noting that when Ralph does do that, he gets told incorrect passcode, in reverse, garbled up, and slowed down. This is somewhat similar to what we hear on Night 5 in FNAF 1, after Ralph is killed by every animatronic, though in FNAF 1 we specifically hear Golden Freddy scream. Speaking of that voicemail we hear on Night 5, this is actually a really weird one. As I said earlier, it's a reversed, garbled up version of an excerpt from Autobiography of a Yogi. But what does it actually mean? Well, this excerpt is specifically talking about living organic metals, which originally might have been tied to the fact that the animatronics are haunted, but now with hindsight, this could have been the first hint toward Remnant, which is weird. The chance that Scott planned Remnant that far in advance is almost certainly zero. This is a pretty perfect example of what I mean when I say that FNAF 1 is a victim of retroactive storytelling. This throwaway concept that you have to go out of your way to decode in FNAF 1 somehow has a level of relevance to concepts that weren't introduced into the story until almost half a decade later. It's certainly not the best method of writing a story, but like I said, Scott was writing this as he went along. There are bound to be things like this. It is what it is. Speaking of things that have changed over the years, let's talk about those 5 missing kids for a moment. That number has grown. Somehow. Ever since the release of the first Fazbear Frights book, the number of missing kids has gone up from 5 to 6. This is one of those things that really sparked the whole separate continuities thing, but in recent years, more and more people have been trying to say that it's 6 missing kids in both the games and the books. Whether or not that's because of more and more people believing that there's only one continuity or not, is a topic for a video that I'm not ready to make yet. But apart from that, everything else about the missing children incident seems to be the same. Kids got lured away by William Afton and stuffed into the animatronic suits, which led to everyone noticing that the animatronics looked and smelled like death. Except for the police, apparently. Not sure how they screwed that one up. Now, onto something else that the books have changed people's perception of. Let's talk about It's Me for a moment. Originally, we all associated this phrase directly with Golden Freddy. In later forms of FNAF media, like FNAF World and the Security Logbook, it seemed like it really was being associated with him specifically, which is a bit ironic considering it's not associated with Golden Freddy at all in this game, as it pops up with Freddy and Bonnie. I'm sure all of you are aware of the fact that It's Me got its meaning turned on its head when the week before it came out. I haven't actually listened to what others think of it yet, but after mulling it over following my video on the book, I'm pretty sold on the thought that it's meant to be a way for a lost spirit to try and find themselves again. Rather than it being a way for a soul to call out to someone else, it's a way for a soul to reinforce who they are for their own sake. That said, that doesn't exactly line up with every instance of its use in the week before, so honestly, I'm expecting my answer to change on this at some point in time. Would it be the first time that my thoughts on what it meant completely changed? If you want to hear what I originally thought it meant, I went on a rant about that in the last video I made, so go check that out. And if you watch that video and this video without at least subscribing to me, I will appear at your bedside tonight. Shameless plugs and definitely not empty threats aside, I've gone over most of the things I want to go over from FNAF 1. All but one. The reason that I haven't brought this up yet is because I truly believe that it can be the retcon. Either that, or it could be completely explained away as a ruse. It has to do with one of these newspapers I was talking about earlier. Since it's important, I'll read this one out loud to you. 5 children now reported missing. Suspect convicted. 5 children are now linked to the incident at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, where a man dressed as a cartoon mascot lured them into a back room. While the suspect has been charged, the bodies themselves were never found. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza has been fighting an uphill battle ever since to convince families to return to the pizzeria. It's a tragedy. A suspect was charged and convicted. In case you don't know what these terms actually mean, let me explain as simply as I can. Being charged with something essentially means that you're just being accused of something and are probably under investigation. However, since people are innocent until proven guilty, being charged with something isn't actually the end of the world, even if it's a terrible look. That said, being convicted of a crime is where things start to get bad. Being convicted of a crime means that you've stood trial and the judge has deemed you guilty. Whatever you were accused of, the court of law has dictated that the proper punishment will ensue. So what would that punishment look like? Considering that 5 kids are missing, with the bodies never being found, I imagine that the suspect would ultimately be charged and convicted with first-degree kidnapping. The punishment for this varies state by state, and thankfully, we actually have irrefutable proof of where these games take place. In FNAF 6, if you screw up hard enough, you can get sued. And at the top of the lawsuit, it reads, "In the District Court of Utah, 5th Judicial District, Washington County." Going under the assumption that these games take place around the same area, which we have no reason not to believe, it would mean that all of these games take place in Utah, specifically in Washington County. And yes, that is where the city of Hurricane is located. This probably isn't a massive revelation to anyone, since I think that everyone at least considered the games taking place here after the Silver Eyes, but it's nice that the game actually hands that to us. Anyway, back on topic. Based on my research, first-degree kidnapping in Utah would lead to at least 15 years in prison, and potentially life. But since there are 5 kids missing, yeah, the suspect is almost certainly locked up for life. So chances are that the killer, William Afton, is in jail for life. Except we know for a fact that he isn't. He's not in jail at all. He's active long past the MCI. He's there for the DCI, the death of the 5 children at the FNAF 2 location. And then eventually he's there to get spring-locked. Both of these would be impossible if he were in jail for life. This would actually make a lot of sense as the retcon that Scott brought up years ago. On that note, let's actually go over everything that he said about the retcon. He says that he's only ever done one actual retcon in the series, and refuses to say where it was. He then says that there have been times where his original intentions didn't come across clearly, and that he made a point to clarify that in his next game. He also said that the retcon was integrated pretty seamlessly, and that most people didn't notice. If it had caused problems or confusion, then he would have addressed it. This statement was made on September 4th of 2017. With these details in mind, let's take another look at this newspaper situation. This isn't something that was ever clarified in a future game. In fact, it's never really brought up again to my knowledge, nor was anyone talking about it back in 2017. So it fits the criteria of being something that a lot of people didn't notice, and it was never touched up at all. So this actually might be the answer. We may have actually just found the retcon, right? Well, maybe, but if that's true, then it actually raises a bit of a problem that I have with this statement that Scott made. Scott said that it's something that a lot of people didn't notice, and I'm sure that's true. Or at least, it was true. But that statement was made all the way back in 2017. Do you know how many times this community has reprocessed all of the information given to us in the older games? Hell, I've been doing that for this entire video. And if you've been engaged with this video at all, then you've been doing it too. Maybe nobody questioned it back then, but who's to say that nobody's questioned it in the time since? Because, in fact, I did hear people talking about this very situation earlier this year. People were talking about the possibility of the suspect mentioned in these newspapers not being William, but actually being Henry, and that being the reason that he's seemingly missing up until FNAF 6. That could make sense, but if this is the retcon, then all of that time people have spent theorizing about that has completely gone to waste. And that's the problem I have with this statement. For all we know, we could be spending days, weeks trying to figure out an explanation for something, only for it to be a retcon. The retcon that Scott told us about years ago that we never got clarification on. And we'll probably never get official word on what that retcon is, because Scott isn't one to actually give us official statements on this kind of stuff. And I'm not about to start a campaign to try and get him to tell us the answer. He's made it pretty clear that he doesn't want to give specific answers, and I respect that. It just kinda sucks that we have a variable that we can't predict, and will inevitably shoot someone's theory in the foot, if it hasn't already. But anyway, I think that's all I have to say. For some reason, I thought this would be a quick video, but if the size of this script has anything to say about it, this is a doozy. But that's alright. If you enjoyed this, be sure to let me know in the comments. If reception for this video is good, then I might end up doing the same for FNAF 2 at some point. And if reception of this video sucks, then I'll just f*** off and make videos on something else, I don't know. Thanks for watching. I'm gonna go pull a video idea out of a hat and force myself to finish Tales from the Pizzaplex. New videos coming as soon as I can land on a topic. Take it easy.